much, Manthan, for inviting me this morning, and my apologies for bringing you in on a Sunday morning. But there is no other city in the country where perhaps the weather would be so nice and the people would be so generous and the traffic would be so accommodating except Hyderabad. And I've suggested this in the past, Hyderabad should have been India's original capital city. But, had you become India's original capital city, you would have become as polluted as Delhi has. And I don't only refer to the air pollution, I refer to the people who live on the ground. The air pollution in Delhi is on...
Making an important announcement that he has brought out this amazing book called 2019 How Modi Won India. This book is up for sale outside near the tea area. I would urge you all to buy a copy and get it autographed by him before he leaves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is another reason why Hyderabad is different. In Delhi, they won't do that. In Delhi, everybody expects a free copy. Particularly because everybody there believes in some way or the other they are a VVIP. So once you're a VVIP, one of the conditions of being a VVIP, bureaucrats are here, they will know better than I do, that you expect books and other things to be given for free. When Ajay Bhai told me what will you speak on, I mean we discussed it and he phrased it as 2000. I didn't want to speak just on the book. I would like you to read it. But we thought we'd speak on 2019 and beyond. What will Modified India look like? And one of the reasons for that is that this book was completed by me in October. And look at all that has changed in the last 3 months. You know, in Britain, the former British Prime Minister Harold Wilson once said a week is long time in politics. In India, 12 hours is enough. If you don't believe me, ask Devendra Fadnavis from my home state of Maharashtra. He still doesn't know what hit him. But that is India. You know, at 11:30 in the night on the 23rd of November, we had announced that Uddhav Thackeray had been chosen as the Chief Minister. Next morning, 7:30 p.m., we find Devendra Fadnavis being sworn in. The President of India actually woke up, it seems, suddenly at 6 a.m. in the morning to sign a presidential notification. At 5 a.m., the Prime Minister of the country recommended President's rule. And I asked a BJP leader, what was the hurry? They said, no, the Prime Minister wakes up early. I said, really? That he wakes up so early that at 5 a.m. in the morning, you have the urgency to lift President's rule and then have a swearing-in ceremony at 7:30 in the morning where no one is informed, barring the two people who are going to be sworn in. So in India, it is hazardous to predict the future. And I will not use this occasion to predict the future because you never know what will happen. Just look at what has happened in the last 3 months. The BJP has lost elections in Jharkhand. The popularity in Haryana came down substantially. The Shiv Sena has suddenly discovered that it was a mistake to mix religion with politics. I mean, it took them 50 years to finally realize what many of us had been saying for years and had been beaten up for saying it. That it took you 50 years to realize. But good for Uddhav Thackeray, good for anyone who comes out in public and admits that it's a mistake to mix religion with politics. And now, as we've seen in the last week, students, or last 10, 15 days in some parts, well, actually a month now, we've seen students coming out, many of them spontaneous, many of them leaderless, coming out and speaking. And last week, when students from St. Stephen's College decided to boycott classes, I said, this is truly revolutionary. When St. Stephen's College, which is seen to be the symbol of establishment, where there have been more bureaucrats, more politicians who've come out, actually also decide to boycott classes, it means that Hyderabad Central University has finally met St. Stephen's. And you finally have a student population which wants to, in some way, be heard. So much has changed in the last 3 months. I want to use this occasion to look at certain trends, though, that I believe are far more durable, that I noticed in the build-up to 2019, and I believe that will perhaps be with us for the next few years. You see, we live in an age which is a breaking news cycle, where today's news is tomorrow's history. So sometimes we tend to get so caught up in what is happening at the moment that we lose sight of the big picture. So I hear people now saying, This must be the beginning of the end of Mr. Modi. Look at all these students. They are now, and I say, hold on. This kind of irrational exuberance, and whichever way, whether you are anti-Modi or pro-Modi, the irrational exuberance that is demonstrated on one hand by Mr. Modi's supporters, who believe he is here for life, and by his detractors, who hope that tomorrow you'll have a new government. None of this is going to happen when you look at the big picture. So I'm going to do, at this outset, 10 trends that I have spotted. And look at these trends and what these trends mean for us as a people, as a nation, as a country. The first trend that I want to look at is the rise of what I call the strong man. This is the age of the political supremo. We are a democracy, but we are a parliamentary system which has become presidential in some form. Indians are no longer voting on values, on ideas, on ideology also. They vote for the individual. So even elections in this country have become about a presidential kind of system. Modi versus who? To some extent, even state elections, KCR versus who? When I was here in Hyderabad 14 months ago, if you looked around Hyderabad, you only saw KCR's pictures. It seemed almost as if the opposition was invisibilized. And we saw that in Delhi also during the national elections. Elections in this country are becoming about people hankering for this Superman. Who is going to be that one, or superwoman possibly? Who is going to be that man or woman who's going to solve all our problems? So while there are 543 constituencies in the country, many people actually voted for an individual, not a political party. I start my book with an instance which I think reflects this. There's an old lady, she goes, 80-year-old lady, goes to Rai Bareli, true story, and creates a huge fuss. Says, ye EVM jo hai, isme khot hai. Ye EVM galat hai. So that returning officer comes and says, what is the problem, madam? Nahi, nahi, aap logon ne cheating ki hai. Isme Modi ji ki tasveer kidhar hai? He says, but EVM पे मोदी जी की तस्वीर नहीं होती, वो पार्टी की होती. नहीं, मैं मोदी जी के लिए वोट करने आई हूं. Now she didn't know the name of the candidate, she didn't know anything beyond the fact that there was one individual she wanted to vote for. And our post-poll study shows that 1 in every 3 Indians who voted for the BJP in 2019 voted only because of Narendra Modi. So what is happening as a result is candidates matter less and less, and we are becoming willy-nilly, slowly an elected autocracy, wherein the individual matters much more than any institutions. And this may be a trend which is global, across the world, whether it is a Trump in America, whether it is a Putin in Russia. I hate to suggest that we will go the Russian way, but maybe we'll go the Turkey way of Erdogan, who tomorrow decides, I am going to be president for life. But essentially, we are creating an elected autocracy in the manner in which elections are now run in this country. And money, the media, are all weapons in this, used to prop up this larger-than-life image, this personality cult, particularly the media. The way the media covers the election, you tend to invisibilize a particular, you tend to invisibilize the opposition and prop up an individual. So that is one trend, and that trend is getting accentuated across India. Not just in Delhi, but across India today, if you look, there is this hankering for the strong leader who's going to fix the system. The second trend and link to that is the fact that while we talk about economy in recession, my belief is democratic institutions are in recession in this country. And we can go and look at them one by one. Take a look at Parliament, for example. Article 370 is moved in the Parliament at 11 a.m. in the morning by the Home Minister of the country without informing the opposition. You put it out there, you say, I'm sending a copy to the President, now let's debate. So you've already got it, getting it passed from the president, then we'll have a debate. Same thing with Citizenship Amendment Act. We are bringing in the Citizenship Amendment Act. We brought it in, it's in enforcement, now let's have a dialogue. When actually democracy demands exactly just the opposite. That first you have a dialogue, first you have a process of consultation, and then you decide what you're going to do. So Parliament has been reduced to a notice board. Today in Parliament, this will happen. Please vote for it. We'll decide tomorrow what fallout it has. And we've seen that happening time and time again. So it's not an isolated instance. Time and time again, controversial, contentious legislation is being pushed through by reducing Parliament to a notice board. The executive, frankly, is a rubber stamp. To my mind, one visual this week exemplified this problem. The Prime Minister of the country chooses to have a meeting with industrialists on Monday and with economists on Wednesday. These are supposedly pre-budget meetings. The one individual who is absent at these pre-budget meetings is the Finance Minister. Now, it either means that the Finance Minister, and so I asked someone, where is the Finance Minister? Is she out of town? She may be traveling. No, sir, she's very much in Delhi. She's explaining the budget to party workers. Now, imagine a serious meeting that has to take place on the budget with economists, with industrialists, does not involve the Finance Minister, which means essentially we are no longer a cabinet system, but a one-man system which has become a two-man system. I call them Gujarat Jodi number 1. You know, there's the Prime Minister and there's his Svengali, Amit Shah. In fact, in the book, and this is a relationship that goes back, and this system, this is the Gujarat model which has gone national. Please understand, this has not happened yesterday or today. 1987, Mr. Modi and Amit Shah first fought an election together, Ahmedabad municipal elections. I was told by an old Gujarat journalist that they would go through the bylanes of Gujarat, Amit Shah on the scooter, Modi on pillion. I've still tried to imagine what that must look like. But in that election, they engineered defections. They paid off independents. They did everything that they could do at a municipal level, which now you want to do at a national level. And even in Gujarat, when Mr. Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat for 12 years, for about 10 years of that, Amit Shah held 12 portfolios. He essentially was the one who ran the government. So there is the mascot and there is the executioner. There is Don Quixote and there is Sancho Panza. But the fact is that this is a relationship which they have built and nurtured over 32 years. In fact, the cabinet meetings in Gujarat would never last more than 10 minutes. Mr. Modi would come, say a few things, go away. Amit Shah would then conduct the remaining meeting. It now happens in Delhi. So the executive has become a rubber stamp. Then you have so-called autonomous institutions, like the Reserve Bank of India, like the Central Information Commission. The Reserve Bank of India has seen 2 governors quit in the last 5 years, including the hand-picked governors. Because when you come up with a major policy initiative like demonetization, you go against the Reserve Bank of India governor's advice. When you want money out of the Reserve Bank because your coffers are emptying and the governor of Reserve Bank puts his foot down, what do? You force him to resign. Your man, Urjit Patel. So the Reserve Bank of India, which is supposed to be the guardian in a way of our treasury, of your and my money in a way, is also handmaiden to the government. The government can, when it wants, dip into the Reserve Bank's coffers, use that money, and use that money possibly to make itself more electable. The Information Commissioner, the Chief Information Commissioner, Chief Vigilance Commissioner, Chief Information Commissioner, many of the Information Commissioners have not been appointed for months. There are there are positions that have been vacant for more than a year. I asked someone why. He said, sir, आप कितना information आपको देंगे? So most RTI applications therefore now go not applicable, can't give. Now these were supposedly the checks and balances of our systems, the so-called watchdogs. The Reserve Bank of India was to be a check on the government in the way its finances were run. So were these information commissioners. So were the police. Look at how the Delhi police has behaved on JNU. They hold a press conference. And in the press conference, they name 9 individuals. The 9 individuals have been named basically using various videos that have been circulated by the ABVP. It is as if the violence that has taken place does not involve the ABVP but involves the left. So the police becomes an extension of the state. And this is again the Gujarat model. Long before JNU, there was MS University. Please see the only liberal university in Gujarat. The state it has been reduced to. Between 2002 and 2010, there were several instances where the VHP walked into MS University and resorted to violence. Nobody was, at the end of the day, prosecuted. So who is to say JNU is any different? So the police becomes a handmaiden of whoever is in power. And more disturbingly, so do the armed forces. Never before in this country have we seen army officers speak so openly about political issues. Army officers write, Air Force officers write columns justifying the government's decisions. So, and then if you do so, you get rewarded one day by becoming Chief of Defense Staff. So the reward system is also very clear. But essentially what you've done therefore is compromised on yet another, or one of the few autonomous institutions in this country. And then of course you have the media. Never before in the history of this country has such a large section of the media been so surrogate and so supplicant to whoever is in power. During Indira Gandhi's regime, they said when the media is asked to bend, they crawled. Today we are doing what you call in Marathi, Sashtang Namaskar. We have prostrated. And the prostration has been done in a manner that defies all sense and all logic of why we became journalists in the first place. More questions today continue to be asked on several TV channels and indeed large sections of the mainstream media to the opposition more than the government. Now, if the opposition, if you are going to tell truth to opposition and not truth to power, then why have we become media persons? But the nature of the media and the manner in which the media is used today to manipulate a political agenda or is used to manipulate minds is almost frightening. It's the media which coins terms like Tukde Tukde gang and urban Naxals, which then get repeated by the politicians. So I don't know who's driving whom. Hashtags on social media are almost in consonance between the political power party and the media. So the media has become a surrogate. All of this leads me to believe that we are entering a phase where democratic institutions are in recession. So that is one trend, and one trend which is likely to accentuate. Let me turn to a third trend, which I think is an equally important trend in the times in which we live. We live, I think, in an India which is seeing what I call the creeping Hinduization of society. The rise of the political Hindu, as I call it in the book. The Hindu, in a sense, has found his or her political identity. Now, we see it in various forms. In Delhi, I see it in the number of cars that have Hanuman stickers on them. I never saw these stickers in the past. Now everyone wants and it's an angry looking Hanuman. I want a Hanuman at least who smiles. The Hanuman must not smile, he has to look angry. So the angry looking Hanuman sticker is all over us. Look at the number of religious rituals that are now celebrated with even greater fervor and with state support. The state now increasingly supports these various religious festivities that are held to a much greater, on a much greater scale. So far more money will be spent today on building a temple, possibly a Bhavya Ram Mandir as they call it, than will be spent on building schools and colleges in this country. Because overt religiosity has now become part of our political template. And the way to do it is clear. You play politics by othering the minorities. You have to find an other. You have to find a new enemy. Aaj ka dushman kaun? So one day it could be, as it was in 2002, the Godhra Muslim. In 2019, it was the Kashmiri Muslim. Aided, abetted, of course, by the Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. Never before has Pakistan played such a big role in an Indian election than ever before. And it continues to. I mean, why should you go to Bid in Maharashtra in the elections in October, and instead of talking about the severe water scarcity in the villages of Bid, which had not had water for more than 4 months, you go there and create a Ravan and say, हमने Article 370 को जला दिया है. What does the average voter in Bid have to do with Ravan and Article 370? You go to Jharkhand and resort to what I call is clear dog whistle politics. कि देखिए भैया, ये जो प्रोटेस्टर है, ये कौन है आप जानते हैं उनके कपड़े देखकर. This is not being said by some local neta, it is being said by India's tallest leader. And the dog whistle politics continues time and again. Infiltration. जानिए वो वहां से आ रहे हैं, घुसपैठिए हैं, टर्माइट्स हैं, दीमक की तरह. You want to create in the minds of the average Indian a sense that there is an other who is responsible for your situation. And that, to my mind, represents this growing sense that the time has come in a way to create a sense of a Hindu identity. Not a Hindu identity based on the great values of the Gita, but a Hindu identity based by finding the other and making the other your enemy. And that enemy can change. It can be the Khan Market gang and the so-called urban Naxals. It can be the Tukde Tukde gang. I sometimes wonder who is this real Tukde Tukde gang country. Those who beat up teachers and students, or those who you claim are Tukde Tukde because they oppose you. Who are the real anti-nationals? Look, the debate is no longer about Hindu versus Muslim. It is national versus anti-national. The number of times a minister in this government, Giriraj Singh, has asked people to go to Pakistan. Pakistan won't have so many visas to give. You know, you are creating in the minds of Indians a sense of us versus them. Which brings me to another trend, which is the growing fear, anger among the minorities, and a counter-polarization that is taking place. Let's be honest, let's not be politically correct. Just as you have a growing assertive Hindutva majoritarian politics, you also have an increasingly fearful, angry minority which says, okay, this is the politics you're going to play, we are going to mobilize. Or we are going to do counter-mobilization. And some of them are getting radicalized, some of them are getting more extreme. And you are therefore creating a potential volcano on which we all sit today. Because this is, at the end of the day, a more plural society. This city represents that pluralism. But what we are doing is pushing each other into our ghettos, into our boxes, and dividing us. And those divides will only increase. Because when the chief executive of the country legitimizes it, when he, through his rhetoric, speaks of Shamshan and Kabristan, you are effectively creating that divide within society. And my fear is that divide will deepen in the times to come. The other trend, in a way, that I believe is increasing in a way, but we don't know which way it will go, is the increasing push for regional identities. There is a growing federal push in this country. India cannot be run from Delhi. And I think Mr. Modi and Amit Shah are making the same mistake that Indira Gandhi made in the 1970s. Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, one size fits all. It doesn't work in India. Which is why the states where the BJP finds it increasingly difficult to make its marks are the state with much more distinctive regional cultures. You're finding that in Tamil Nadu. You can't tell the Tamilian today that hey, aapko Hindi seekhna hai. You can't bring your idea of Hindu-Muslim politics into a Kerala. You can't possibly do that even in Andhra Pradesh. But the pressure, so somewhere down the line, and this leads to another possible trend, a growing South-North divide. You know, you have an India whose politics, and because most news channels are located in Delhi, we think that India is Delhi and Delhi is India. The truth is that if you look at the BJP, their dominance is largely in the north and west of the country. As you move south of the Vindhyas, the BJP finds it much more difficult to deal with the regional identities. And these regional identities will get stronger with time. Already the southern finance ministers are saying, why should we be subsidizing the northern states? Why should we be penalized for having better social indices? And they are probably right. Today you are seeing parts of this country which will possibly grow at 8, 10, 12% and parts which are growing at 2 and 3%. But the parts which are growing at 2 and 3% have much higher population growth rates. Now, therefore, this imbalance between north and south, to my mind, in the years will grow. And in finding ways to manage this federalism, this strongman politics won't do. I don't think Modi can dictate to a KCR or Modi can't dictate to a Mamata Banerjee even in Bengal or to a Naveen Patnaik in Odisha. So you're going to have tensions which will come as a result of this kind of Delhi-centric politics being imposed on the rest of the country. Let's also be honest. The BJP is India's dominant #1 party today. It has built the most formidable machine in the history of the democratic world. A lot of it is explained in this book, but I'll just give you one fact. The BJP identified 22 crore Indians who had benefited from various government schemes. Let us assume typically Indians exaggerate. And it was 11 or 12 million Indians, 11 or 12 crore Indians only. The BJP got the list from the government of India of all the beneficiaries of their various schemes. Gave this list to a private party in Mumbai called Jarvis. Got Jarvis to set up 162 call centers. One call center for 3 Lok Sabha constituencies. Paid them. Had large numbers of employees across the country. These companies, these call centers had to contact every government beneficiary and tell them, Chunav aa raha hai, Modi ji ko vote dena. Now, this complete blurring of lines between Sarkar, Sangathan, private parties, where your and my information can be made freely available to a private agency for political ends. So let's be very clear. The BJP has been waiting for this moment for more than 9 decades. The RSS was formed in 1925. We are in 2019. Narendra Modi is simply the mascot, the messenger. The machine is intact. And it is the most formidable machine. At one level, you have to doff your hat that someone has made politics so competitive. I keep saying, Narendra Modi has done to politics what Virat Kohli has done to cricket. Today, you can't play for India unless you are supremely fit. Similarly, you can't do politics unless you are willing to fight it out. You can't be Rahul Gandhi saying, I'm going on vacation. Doesn't work. Rahul Gandhi has never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And I also say this, that unless that Mr. Modi's best ally is Mr. Gandhi. Because it allows Mr. Modi to tell a story or spin a story. Mr. Modi is a very effective communicator. He is a master storyteller. Many years ago, I asked him, sir, what was the subject you liked most in school? He said, dramatics. Now, he is able to spin the story that Rahul Gandhi belongs to the old, entitled, Lutyens elite, as Mr. Gopal Krishnan called it over breakfast this morning. That these are the children of privilege, and they are. I am the boy who has come from Vadnagar and come all the way to 7 Lok Kalyan Marg. Contrast the journeys. I am the Karma Yogi. It's a great story. You know, when you think of it, it's like Mahendra Singh Dhoni saying, I've come from Ranchi and I went on to win the World Cup. It's a story which is, of course, embellished along the way. I am a Karma Yogi. I don't know how many Karma Yogis change clothes 6 times a day, but our Karma Yogi does. You know, the fact is that I am a Karma Yogi who works 20 hours. Poor Manmohan Singh also worked 20 hours. Only thing he didn't know how to market it. But here you say, I work hard. The other side doesn't. And then when you show someone who's going off on holidays, vacations, saying, I'm now taking a sabbatical, I look even more impressive. So one trend is very clear. The BJP will be the dominant party, and the opposition at the moment faces serious structural problems. You cannot have a Congress high command culture and be a 5th generation dynast and expect to take on this highly competitive force that the BJP is today. Let me turn to another trend, which I think is interesting. We live, I believe, in this country more than ever before, and this city is a good example, in the age of technology. Technology is going to be both an enabler and a disruptor. Technology is an enabler to the extent that technology, and Mr. Modi has been very effective at this, is able to in some way ensure direct benefit of various government services and cutting off some of the bureaucratic flab, the red tapeism. So whether it's a Jan Dhan Yojana or whether it's an Ujjwala, whether it is direct cash transfers, the Modi government has been very successful and very skillful in using technology to directly connect with large numbers of masses. And I have no doubt, and this process has not started with Mr. Modi. It started even before. You know, we seem to believe that India got independence in May 2014. It didn't. If you look at the number of Indians pulled out of poverty between 2006 and 16, that's the highest number in the 7 decades of Indian independence. But the fact is, technology is going to play a huge role in the future in enabling many and more Indians to have access to resources that they didn't have. Technology is also a disruptor. And the disruption will be an asymmetry in power. Today, you and I with WhatsApp and with our mobiles can in some way mobilize and come together in ways that were unimaginable 10 years ago. Look at many of these protests. They are leaderless. They are young people sending WhatsApp messages, Facebook posts to each other. We are going to gather here at this point. Let's come together. What it also means is there's no place to hide today. Technology will ensure in some way or the other that collectivities are built. People can ask questions to those in power in a manner that they could never do. So I think technology is, we are seeing it in Hong Kong in a strange way in the protests taking place against the mighty authoritarian Chinese regime. And who is to say this won't happen in this country as well? We are seeing 1 million mutinies brewing in different parts of India. There was a farmers' protest 2 years ago in Maharashtra which was not led by anyone. The farmers came spontaneously on the streets in a way. And it was unheard of. 10, 20 years ago, you had to have political rallies, you had to organize them. So the same weapon, and the BJP has used WhatsApp as a weapon to mobilize it, will also have a counter-polarization in the years to come, possibly, from ordinary Indians who feel left out. Let's also be honest, that while democracy is in recession, the economy too, at the end of the day, is the other big challenge that we face. How are you going to provide jobs to the millions of Indians who are entering the job market every month is an issue which is simply not debated or discussed enough. And the truth is, we are entering an age of, yes, India's great demographic dividend, but also of a potential demographic disaster. The young are starting to ask questions. There is an anxiety. It hasn't turned into anger yet, but there is anxiety. There is anxiety over the future in a country where the divides in society are widening. And how are they widening? Early, before 1991, there was a license permit Raj. You wanted to set up a factory, you got a license from government, you knew someone, you did it. Now we are moving from license permit to what I call the age of the oligarchs. If you want to sell your airport, if you want to get airports to be sold through tenders, all will go to Adani. Ports, Adani. Oil, Ambani. Telecom, Ambani. A very much like a Russian model, where you have these oligarchs who are coming to power. And a growing inequity, therefore, among people. Resources. We thought liberalization would ensure a greater, wider distribution of resources. Yes, the Indian middle class is growing. More and more people are flying Indigo, which their fathers or their mothers could never do. But along with that, there is a growing concentration of resources around a few individuals. And those individuals have enriched themselves through personal contact. Economic reform in this country no longer takes place through policies. A large number of it takes place through personal relation. आप जानते हो इनको? If you know someone, your work will get done. So it's not as if the economy is pushing ahead through genuine reform. Yes, Mr. Modi's government has done some valuable reform, insolvency and bankruptcy code being an example of it. Yes, on solar power they've done good work. But by and large, the entire model seems to be much like the Gujarat model, private-public partnership. We will decide who we are going to give which contract to. Finally, I come to the trend that I hope offers the real hope in the future. And that is you and me, the citizens of this country. We are, frankly, the most aspirational mobile society the world has ever seen. I believe we are more aspirational than even America was in its pomp in the 20th century, early part of the 20th century. Every Indian has only one ambition. Mere bete or beti ko, I want them to do better than I did. And we will break any door to do it. And to my mind, the energies of that civil society. You know, groups like Manthan represent the strength of this civil society. Which is why, you know, those who say, India eventually, हम कहीं चीन की तरफ नहीं जा रहे, टर्की जैसे नहीं बनेंगे, रशिया, अरे ये इंडिया है. यहाँ ये नहीं हो सकता है. We will not become China because of you. Because Indians will at the end of the day ask questions. हम सवाल पूछना अच्छा. Indians love to ask questions. We love to debate. Dissent is in our lifeblood. You cannot push us beyond the point. You cannot tell us what to do top down all the time. And it is that civil society, I think, which eventually will have a pushback. Because a pushback, to my mind, is inevitable in societies like India. We saw it in the 1970s with Indira Gandhi. And what happens with these supreme leaders is they get disconnected from the people. They talk of India first. We should be asking them about citizen first. They talk of new India. We should be asking them about a better India. You tell me how you're going to build a better India. You can't build a better India based on hate, bigotry, dividing people. You can't build a better India on a permanent steroids of toxic populist nationalism. आज सीए, कल एनआरसी, परसों मंदिर, चौथे दिन सिविल कोड, ये बबल नहीं चलता रहेगा. It can last only up to a point. Because people at the end of the day in this country want to know, the aspirational Indian wants to know, please tell me how you are going to give me a better life tomorrow. Yes, the politics of caste and community can have short-term vote bank politic benefits. But in the long term, it is my belief, maybe I'm an optimist, India is a land where the country is bigger than individuals. Today you may build around this cult of bhakti and say, नहीं, आप मोदी जी के खिलाफ एक शब्द बोले, तो हम आपको ठोक देंगे. I heard this in a program I did 2 days ago with Kanhaiya Kumar. तुम बोलो तो ठोक देंगे तुमको. I never thought that this language would be used. But this is the new India language. This is not the language of a better India. This is not a language of citizen nationalism. When people ask you about religious nationalism, you need to counter it with citizen nationalism. That puts citizens first. I don't know what more I can add, but I'm happy to take questions. Thank you all very much for hearing me out so patiently. Thank you.
Namaskar. I would like to ask you one simple, this one. I 100% concur with your views. In this country of different regions, different religions, we must develop the elite secular country. There is no second thought on that. But the only point is it will get credibility when we take up all the issues equally. So now the problem is communalism, whether it's a majority or minority, is getting credibility when the liberals and secularists are not in a position to champion the cause irrespective of the parties, irrespective of the majority minority.
You know, we now engage in politics as whataboutry. What about Kashmiri Pandits? What about 1984? Now, the fact is, what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits was wrong. What happened to Kashmiri Pandits must be opposed condemned in the strongest possible words. But are we in 2019 going to now make every Kashmiri Muslim, many of whom are born post 1990, be held responsible for what happened 29 years ago? You see, how far back in time do we want to go in a millennial society? Somebody once asked me, आपने बहुत 2002 के दंगे cover किए, आपने 1984 क्यों नहीं cover किया? I said 1984, I was a 19-year-old. I would have loved to cover it, but I was in college. What happened to the Sikhs is terrible. Who is saying it's justified? And I agree with you that the secularists or the so-called liberals may have failed us. But their failure cannot be, the answer to their failure is not to impose more hate and more divide in society. The answer is to how to bring together. You see, that doesn't happen. So I agree with you. You have identified the problem. But the solution lies in, frankly, giving real flesh and blood to concepts like secularism. They can't just lie in our constitution book. Minority and majority communalism must both be rejected.
Program with the London Talk, and it's really exciting, not just for the English speaking audience who are used to listen to you, but also for a lot of others. My question to you is, how interesting, challenging, complex for you was that to switch to a digital platform, and what do you see news moving towards in the digital platform in the coming time?
As I said just now, one of the trends, technology is an enabler. I am desperately determined to reach out to the Hindi speaking audiences. That is where India is in ferment in a way. So we went to Allahabad University and we were to do a Neta Nagri, and we were kept there for 4 hours with questions. They said, nahi, jaane nahi denge. There is a huge hunger to have a dialogue. You see, the problem with actually the dialogue should be with those in power who can do something. They don't want to have a dialogue. They have one-way communication. So I think Neta Nagri I wish on Neta Nagri we can now take audience questions while the program is live. But I am astounded. We do it every weekend. And we get, between Facebook, Twitter, we get more than 5 million people watching it every week now. And, it has become, if we don't air it, one week I took a holiday on first week, I got messages, sir, aap hai nahi aaj. So, this hunger for information is out there. And I think technology will provide us a huge opportunity. It's very simple. The great thing about digital is it's simple. So the simplicity of technology will enable us perhaps to break with this. Nobody wants to watch TV today. Frankly, I would not watch TV. I don't. When I go home, I watch sport. Because sport makes you feel good. TV makes you feel bad. I say there are 2 occasions you should watch TV. If someone in your family has low blood pressure, make them watch TV so the blood pressure rises. The second time is if, God forbid, someone in your family is in coma and you need them to revive, make sure you watch a noise debate on primetime TV. They'll wake up. Otherwise, don't watch TV. No names.
Rajdeep, I was at ISB recently.
Sorry?
I was at ISB recently where there was a fantastic conference where political leaders and the best of academics internationally spoke on money power in politics. what was actually very clear to all, that both people on the podium and the huge audience, everyone wants clean politics and an opportunity to participate in actively. That has become a part of politics, be a politician as a profession. So my question to you is, you seem to be optimistic, but what do you think will be the tipping point? And will it happen, say, in the next 5 years or 10 years, the way technological change has happened? Can there be a societal change?
Ma'am, a couple of points. One is, I'm glad you're asking this question in a city and a state which apparently has the most amount of money spent per candidate in an election. Andhra and Telangana are competing with Tamil Nadu and Karnataka now. I'm glad that Maharashtra is no longer there. Look at the people who, I'm not saying it, but generally municipal corporators, most of them are real estate. Where is the money from? It is the cash which, in a sense, oils this machine. And I don't believe that these politicians really want clean politics. They will talk about it, but they have huge benefits because it ensures that there isn't a level playing field. As long as there is such large amounts of money that is used in politics, how will you ensure a level playing field in India? Who's going to ensure that? Look at electoral bonds. You'll have Nitin come in a couple of weeks, but look at the way electoral bonds, 95% of the electoral bonds went to one party. And we don't know the names. So we don't know which industrialist put how much of money with the ruling party and what benefits he or she got in return. And then we call ourselves a democracy. So this disconnect exists, ma'am. And I think because it's reached, the tipping point will come when society in a way is able to find its own space. This whole citizen nationalism, that eventually citizens will come together in some form. It may be at a local level, it may be neighborhood, RWAs, resident welfare association, cooperative society, and say enough is enough. But it's not happening in a hurry, ma'am. In Thane, 120 municipal cooperators, more than 100 of them are linked to the construction industry. Because I'm sure that's the case in Hyderabad as well. But that is, the cash has criminalized our politics. And I don't see that ending in a hurry at all. Look at the money that the BJP today has. The Congress also had it, but as someone told me, Congress wo paisa wo khud kha gaye. Individuals kha gaye. So it's a party with rich individuals and a poor party. BJP, at least they know कि कितना पैसा party में डालना है and कितना अपने pocket में डालना है. But the money is being made. Let's be very clear. It's not as if money hasn't gone out of the system.
Hello. Good morning, Rajdeep. I hope you had a great weekend at Goa. So I think that energy still looks on you when you speak here. And it's really lovely to see you on London Top because you coined another term called Mo Shah.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'd like to hear from you is the Mo Shah effect. And a few things that I wanted to clear or wanted to see is, I won't go to 1990s, but I would go to 2014, 2019, because I think that is where the whole difference lies. 2014 election was majorly against the Congress. 2019 was a vote for the policies of Modi. A few facts that I wanted to clear, because you talked about othering. One of the othering that is being talked about is the othering of the Muslim community, which would be very unfortunate if it happens. But a couple of facts. One, the Hajj quota. Hajj subsidy was removed and it was a huge outcry. But Hajj quota has increased from 1,36,000 in 2014 to 2 lakhs in 2019. If the government were to other, why would they do that? How do you reconcile this position? Another is on the minority budget that the government allocates. It was around 3,500 crores back in 2013, and now it's almost 4,700 or 800 crores, if I'm correct. That is another point I would want you to reconcile for me, because I understand what my age is. You have more number of years in journalistic experience, so I'd learn from you there. And just one more point. I come from Indore, and that is why I want to highlight. Swachh Bharat campaign, that was a behavioral issue. When it was launched in 2014, most of us laughed it out, even those of us who would have been supporters of Modi. But in 2019, it seems to be a good campaign that have changed or transformed a lot of Indians' lives. How do you see that? Thank you.
You've asked a lot of questions. Look, I think the larger question is, we should not in any way underestimate the Modi phenomenon. You mentioned Swachh Bharat. You come from Indore. Let's be honest. The Swachh Bharat campaign in Indore started before 2014. There were individuals, particularly, I think there was a municipal officer there, a municipal commissioner, who drove Indore's Swachh Bharat campaign initially, and a lot of it involves volunteerism. I think it is to the credit of the Prime Minister that he took ownership of it and thereby gave it a face and an impetus. No doubt about it. Let's give credit where it is due. And I think that's important to recognize the fact that Swachh Bharat is an idea whose time has come. Sanitation was an issue which was never debated as much as it has in the last 5-6 years. And that is to the strength of Mr. Modi. Look, Mr. Modi hasn't reached where he has simply by being a divisive politician. I think that would be unfair. And when you said Mo Shah, let's be clear. What I said is they have changed the rules of politics. They've made politics much more competitive and ruthless. That may not necessarily be a negative only. I also think Mr. Modi, by his nature, is a risk taker. For example, when he was Gujarat Chief Minister, he raised power tariffs for farmers. It was a huge risk to take, but he succeeded in the end. To some extent, some of the moves that he has made, even in Delhi, have prevented the kind of retail corruption that existed in the past, where individual ministers could strike their own personal deals. There is a greater supervision in a sense of that kind of retail corruption that takes place. You mentioned the Hajj subsidy. Let's be honest, is that really what Muslims really need today, increasing the Hajj subsidy? I think we have to be very clear what they need. What they need is a sense of confidence, a sense of absence of fear, a sense of security. Does the UP government really provide that? For example, when I come into power and I say the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down all those industries, whether they, which are linked in a way to the cattle trade. So butchers, tanneries, who suffers? When I don't give tickets, when I politically disempower a community, please understand the number of tickets I've given. When I segregate people geographically, and then say, "Par main aapko ye thoda zyada paisa de raha hu," that doesn't work. You see, I think this is again the failings of the Gujarat model. There are strengths of it, but this is the failing. But I do believe, and you're right, that I think we have to also try and understand how Mr. Modi, as I said, has used technology, has actually, one of the staggering facts, there are two statistics that stand out of the 2019 election. One, out of the 192 seats where there was a direct Congress versus BJP contest, the BJP won 175. And by an average margin of 23%. What it meant is that when there is Congress versus BJP, BJP has more than an 80% chance of winning. The other statistic is, people at the bottom of the pyramid, the lower income groups, voted even more for the BJP than the higher income groups. Which means that Mr. Modi has been able to build a trust with the poor. He has been able to, whether you like it or not, convert himself from a suit boot ka neta to a garibo ka neta. So Rahul Gandhi mein se Adani Ambani ka aadmi hai. But that poor person said, nahi sir, kahin na kahin kuch to kiya hai. And the usual refrain is, Congress ko 60 years de diya, inko 10 saal to dete hain. So I think we have to understand the Modi phenomenon without demonizing him as Gabbar Singh and Amit Shah as Samba, and without treating the or without treating him as the avatar of Vishnu. So I think we have to find a more objective assessment of the Modi phenomenon. Let me give you one Amit Shah story, which is the classic story, to understand how they've made elections competitive. The first election Amit Shah contested was 1983, apparently in Gujarat, for his HL Commerce College. So evening before the election, some of his supporters told him, "Sir, you are losing." Against him was a girl candidate, and there were lots of girls in the class. So Amit Shah said, "Ye jitne bhi ladkiyan hain, unke parents ke aap phone number le aao." So he said, "Okay, phone number." This is pre-mobile India, 83. So all the phone numbers are brought. Amit Shah's people then ring up all these parents and said, "Kal apni beti ko college mat bhejo, tufan hoga. Violence hoga." In Gujarat they say tufan. Violence hoga. As it turned out, as a result, half those girls didn't come to school next day, to college. Amit Shah won by about 25 votes. This is where they come from. So the Mo Shah model takes no prisoners. We are going to fight till the end. I mean, look at it. They fought in Tripura. There are only 2 Lok Sabha seats. The BJP had never won a seat in Tripura and even Vidhan Sabha. They broke the Trinamool Congress. They sent Sunil Deodhar, an RSS person there. He worked there for 3 years, built the party machinery, and they won Tripura. Can you imagine any congressman doing it today? Congress wants to win everything by default. कि महाराष्ट्र में poor Sharad Pawar has to do the hard work, हमको मलाई चाहिए. And then when you don't get the ministers, you say, "Oh, I wanted the better minister." You didn't work. So I think the Congress faces, you see, as I keep saying, as long as the Congress in its present system exists, the Modi model seems even more dominant than it actually is. Yes, sir.
Hi, Rajdeep. I'm Satya Raghu. I'm a social entrepreneur and a farmer activist. I have a specific question for you. I don't think, for right reasons, besides Mahatma Gandhi, we have had anybody building the right narratives in the country. We have narratives today, but the narratives of destruction. So my question to you is, how do we, as a community, build better narratives? Because people don't remember numbers, people remember narratives. How do we build those better narratives for better India?
You know, this is a tough question, my friend. I don't have easy answers. There are no bulletproof solutions to say how will we build a better narrative. You know, Salman Khan has a dialogue in Bajrangi Bhaijaan. Nafrat फैलाना बहुत आसान है, प्यार बांटना बहुत मुश्किल. And it is so much easier to play the politics of division than it is to play the politics of inclusion. Just as a narrative. But I think the narrative has to come in some way by involving communities, by talking to people, by engaging people. You know, what are the students, many of these students, you think these student protests are really about Citizenship Amendment Act? I don't think so. A large number of these protests are just a sense of anxiety over the future. That हमसे कोई बोलने के लिए नहीं है. Nobody is telling us, how am I going to get better jobs? How am I going to, improve my incomes? Those are the real issues, I think, on the ground. And there is no one to engage with them. There is no dialogue going on. So I think the way to build narratives is through dialogue. You know, this is such a vast country with so many talented Indians. They want someone to give them a voice. So I think building narratives cannot be done sitting in Delhi in 7 Lok Kalyan Marg, or indeed in KCR sitting in his lovely farmhouse. You know, KCR also has his own Modi model, let's be honest. I don't know how many cabinet meetings he has held in the last 1 year. But, you know, so I think unless leaders go and talk to people, we have lost the art of samvad, of dialogue. And that we are paying the price for that today. I think the young in particular are only asking, let's talk. That's all, without calling each other anti-national if I criticize you. I think if we can do that, we'll have moved ahead.
We have been saying this for a while, Rajiv. If conversations like this happen through the country, it would do a lot of good.
And in every language.
Yeah.
We should get some women to ask questions. Yeah, no problem. I've got a lot of time, ma'am.
Yes, hello, sir. My simple question is media still the fourth pillar of the Indian democracy?
Look, my friend, we are a 50-50 country. The glass is half full, but it's also half empty. I think, look, we did a story day before yesterday exposing some person who admitted to us on camera that he was involved in the beating up of the staff on the 5th. Now the police hopefully will react to that. I think the media has a huge role. We can do it. It's not as if there aren't great journalists. You'll meet Nitin Sethi. He's done great work on election bonds in a couple of weeks. There are lots of journalists doing very good work. The problem is the business model of TV in particular. We have more news channels than any other country in the world. I don't know why. Why do we have 400 news channels? 24/7. Most of them now are ruled by real estate people. They have no commitment to journalism. And no one is making money. But yet the channels are coming up. So the business model has become such that you restrict yourself to debates in studios. Now if you pay, and for 500 rupees on your cable, you will get 200 channels. So the business model is creaking. If you pay peanuts, you will get monkeys. We need philanthropists to say that we are going to invest in good media. Who's going to do that? You know, the Qatar Emir can do it with Al Jazeera. The BBC can do it by charging a tax as part, they get a license fee. Who's going to do it in India? Doordarshan is a government-run channel, and private channels are run for private benefit. So how are you going to break? So unless we can break the business model, but I think with digital coming, there will be new energies, there will be new talents which will come. So the future lies there. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, a very good morning to everyone. And let me just appreciate before my question that really I appreciate your frankness and the way you speak with justice. And it's very lucky to share this question with you. The question is that, like, having seen the awakening has begun, but the government, the RSS, now everyone knows about it. And is there only solution to overthrow them with mass protection, this protest? Or there's something known as, constitutional rights. Now, Supreme Court's getting dominated with the, ruling parties. Now we have ethics community where you can, pull the government down. So do you think that community members can play a major role, or only protest is the solution? And
I'm not here to throw any government out. Please get it very clear. I'm not here, this thing of throwing governments out and, to say that, you see this demonization, too much of our political discourse sometimes gets focused around Mr. Modi, the individual. He has very successfully made the discourse almost about him. I think the discourse needs to change to real issues, education, health. These are the issues we need to talk more about. But you mentioned the Supreme Court. Please look at it. And I forgot to mention it in the institutions that have got compromised. The Chief Justice of India, no less, just a couple of days ago says we cannot discuss, we cannot hear the CAA because there is violence going on. What has the constitutionality or otherwise of the CAA got to do with violence? The Supreme Court judge is not a policeman. But we've seen that habeas corpus, Farooq Abdullah, like him or not, he may have done some terrible things, please throw him out of power. But he is in jail or under detention or house arrest, whatever you want to call it, under house arrest, under detention for 5 months. Habeas corpus petitions of political prisoners in Jammu and Kashmir are not being heard expeditiously by the Supreme Court. Why? Isn't that a fundamental right? My right to right and liberty? So these are the questions that I can only ask. My job is to ask questions, ma'am. My job is not to overthrow anyone. And I think Indians also must start asking questions. The rest will sort itself out, ma'am.
Yeah, your question.
Hi, Rajdeep.
Yes.
I'm a great follower of your 9 p.m. because you really speak on the issues which really matter. Now, how safe are women in Modi government? Because Modi's interaction with women is quite less. And with all the data going around and WhatsApp and Paytm and everything, quite a lot of women, contribute to this economy nowadays in this country.
I think you're being a little unfair. It's not as if women became unsafe only after 2014. Let's be very fair. These are issues which, but again, I think the challenge is to engage people. Let's be honest, Mr. Modi got a large section of the woman voter. Ujjwala in particular, the LPG scheme, was one of the schemes that worked to Mr. Modi's advantage. But let's not divide. We've got enough divides in our society. Now you will add a gender divide, ma'am, which is the last thing we need in our society. We just need better implementation of laws. We need fast-track courts that decide cases involving atrocities on women much faster. Doesn't happen.
Your question.
Hi Rajdeep, my name is Aishwarya. I'm your textbook millennial and according to this government, undesirable number 1. Before I ask my question, I also want to answer this lady's question on what's the tipping point for people to get involved in politics. As a point of hope, I'm part of a group of young people trying to actively contest in the upcoming elections, and we have no money power behind us.
Very good.
And we're trying to figure it out. So we've already reached the tipping point. My question, Rajdeep, so I'm also a Hyderabadi and a Stephanian, and I know the reason why Stephanians are finally speaking up is they recognize the fissures in the system that we exist in. So going back to your question on democratic recession, coming back to Hyderabad, what I realize is everyone since 2014 who had an opinion is maintaining that opinion and now speaking up. But my fear is this large part of the population that has remained silent and apolitical and who blames even the current affairs as politics as usual. Are there any actual breakdown of democratic apparatus that you can see that we can point to as a clarion call? This is no longer just politics, it's about our institutions as a whole.
I wish I could be optimistic, ma'am. I wish you win the election. I mean, we are a strange society where, we keep saying 65% of Indians under the age of 35 and we are ruled by 60 and 70-year-olds. So I hope there are more young people. But I think I think it's anxiety at the moment about the future. I don't think there is any cohesive plan of action that any of us have as to how do we face the future. I know I come from Goa. Every time I go to Goa, I have all my friends in my village, they come and tell me, sir, bahut corruption hai, you must come here. I said, come here and do what? Nahi sir, hum log sab saath mein kuch karenge. And then they tell me the kind of money which is changing hands. Just think of it in Goa. And this is where the BJP has got Congressified in a way. They got 10 people from Congress to defect to the BJP. That included someone who during the by-election campaign was accused of rape. One of them is the Matka king of Goa. So, how do you compete? And that's where money becomes such a big factor. How do you compete with these forces? But eventually, people like you, by pushing the system in your own small way, I think there will come a time, and technology will be the disruptor in India. People will connect with each other in real time. Millions of you will connect. And I hope, therefore, that will, encourage more and more people to raise questions at least, fearlessly.
Rajdeep, you talked about towering personality of Modi.
Sorry?
Towering personality of Modi you spoke about at
Yes,
length,
yes.
which is also further growing because of poor opposition being doldrums. How do you foresee near future the counter to Modi factor, whether an individual emerging or a group of leaders emerging?
It's a good question. Sir, in India you never know. Whoever thought that Anna Hazare, a 76-year-old Gandhian activist, would hold Delhi to virtual ransom for that 1 month in 2011? You never know, sir, where forces come from. Let's not focus too much on the individuals. I would say let's focus on institutions. What we really need are stronger institutions. If the media plays its role, if the Supreme Court plays its role, if these various watchdog institutes play their role, there is a pushback on its own. Let's be honest. I think look at how the NRC, I think people were able to send out a message that we need to be taken into greater confidence before you impose an all India NRC. And Mr. Modi, the mighty Mr. Modi, has distanced himself from the equally mighty Amit Shah in a way and said we have had no discussion on it. So when people speak out, when they express their concerns, eventually, as Jayaprakash Narayan said, I think what was it? Sarkar basically saying ye janta aa rahi hai. Sihasan chodo, ye janta aa rahi hai. Sihasan khali karo, ye janta aa rahi hai. This is a country with a great janta. And why underestimate the intelligence of the average Indian? Indians see through things. We are a great jugadu people. You can't fool an Indian. Up to a point you can. You can carry them away through emotion, but eventually Indians see through it may take much longer, which is sad. Because I think by then institutions will get undermined. Look at the quality of vice chancellors in our universities. I mean, that is one of the saddening aspects of all that is happening around us. A vice chancellor should be standing up for his students and his faculty, not standing up for left versus right. So when a professor gets beaten up, the vice chancellor should be going there to meet her. When he's asked a question, he said, I have an open door, she can come. She's beaten up. You should be going to her. You are wanting her to come to you. So I think institutions is where the challenge lies, rather than individuals. Eventually, institutions, I think, will force governments to course correct.
Hello, I'm Javad, an ex-JUnite. I'm from JNU, a 1986-88 batch.
JNU, wow.
Yeah. Okay. My question is...
Left or right?
I fought for neither left, neither
No,
right.
no, I'm just joking.
My question is, a celebrated journalist like you, how are you able to keep your professional sanity day in, day out, when with every Twitter message, 99% you get trolled, and they are bots who are absolutely straight away on you, attacking you. And it is just not about you as an individual. If you see the saner voices like Ramchandra Guha or any other personality who are being trolled, even a silent protest by Deepika Padukone has been like blown out of proportion. And a very respectable newspaper like The Hindu also getting trolled and attacked and being put into a category. What do you think is the, how you are able to keep day in, day out your professional sanity?
By two things in life, sport and music. As long as there is Kishore Kumar, we are okay in life. Every night I hear 2-3 Kishore songs. Fir subah hogi. Are India, this country, you know, only way to survive in this great country is to be an optimist. If India we are cynical and see the glass as half empty, we will never survive. My enduring sort of images as a young college guy taking that local, you know, whenever I would take the local from cricket matches to come back into town at about 5:30 in the evening, the number of guys hanging on to that train, you know, you were worried someone would fall out, and yet they were full of laughter, fun, being pushed around, someone is playing cards, someone is cracking a joke. Sir, we are like no other country in the world. And therefore, I believe that optimism sustains you. Who are trolls, you know? I mean, anonymity gives you a lot of courage. You know, when you are anonymous, sitting on these internet warriors, very easy to suddenly develop muscle. You must reject, you know, this, and they thrive on this politics of hate. My regret is Mr. Modi follows some of them. I mean, just think of it. The person who called for the death or celebrated the death of Gauri Lankesh is followed by the Prime Minister of the country. And, you know, Amit Malviya, he called me an ISIS agent. It's okay. You know, I didn't know what ISIS stood for, I told him. And I'll send him a copy of my book, but think about it. He is the spokesperson of a party which had the likes of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Good luck to them. Chalte raho, sir. Bahut aadmi musafir hai, aata hai, jata hai. That is Mohammad Rafi, not Kishore Kumar. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Wait. Excuse me, we'll get you a mic, please. Yeah. Excuse me, Rajdeep. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm here.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. One clarification I just wanted to ask about the question he raised about the Hajj subsidy. Hajj subsidy is a financial matter which is not required at all. And the increase of quota is a different thing. I can discuss with him later if there is something. Because I know I'm coming from Jeddah, and I know a lot, and we have received you.
Yes.
2011. Anyway, second thing is the erosion of institutions. Do you think the power of Manthan and all the school, colleges and students that can rise up to these things? And third thing is the strongman Führer comparison. Is there anything that you can say about it?
I'm not going to use the strongman Führer. I'll get trolled again. You just have to see. You just have to be. I just think that society just needs spaces like Manthan. Whether they change society, but you need these spaces. They ensure sanity in an otherwise insane world. Yes.
Hi Rajdeep, Syed here. My question to you is, to talk about anxiety of the future. So, do you really think that changing the faces can really change the fate of India, or something else has to be changed?
No, I think there are huge structural problems. Let's be honest, governance is a structural problem in India. How do you ensure good governance? I mean, let's not lay all the blame again at the door of the government in power. You can lay the blame at them at things like demonetization and the way it was planned and the completely ill-prepared manner that an economy which was growing at 8% is now down to 4.5%. But a lot of the other governance issues in India are structural. You know, let's be honest, this is a subcontinental sized country. You need much stronger accountability at local level for local governments. You need a much more vibrant panchayat system than exists in certain states. So, you know, that's why I said I don't think the conversation should eventually center around an individual. It needs to center around institutions and how do you govern India better.
Yeah, sir. Sir, here.
Yes.
Big fan. Sir, my question is that, like you just mentioned, that today the television media has turned into a business model. So it would be better if we shift to the digital media. But even on digital media and internet, as you just mentioned, Mr. Amit Malviya, and people like those who are working day in and day out to, have their propaganda all over the net, how do we stop that? And isn't
Look, you will at the WhatsApp University will continue in this country. He's a doctorate in WhatsApp University. So that fake news will travel. It travels very fast. And you've got to live with that, man. But that doesn't mean that you don't put out what you think is the correct information or put out correct information. We need more fact checkers. We need more systems which are able to disseminate honest information to the public. But the reality is you're in a digital age. It's a normless world out there. Can I file a defamation suit against someone for calling me an ISIS agent? Maybe I can. But I will have to spend the rest of my life probably fighting him. But it's okay, right? You and your conscience are the only two people you've got to deal with.
Yeah. Your questions.
Rajdeep, seeing you for the second time. First time I saw you in Jawaharlal Nehru way back in 80s.
Yes.
Sitting in a corner in committee room.
Yes, sorry, that's not working.
Yeah, I'm asking you whether this policy of demonetization has not totally failed insofar as use of money in the election is concerned.
The policy of?
Demonetization. Because one of its avowed objective was to curb use of black money.
You tell me the answer, sir. I am not going to answer this.
Well, answer is there.
No, you tell me.
The answer is the people who are spending this money, why don't you take action against them? Where have they brought this money? That is the answer. The answer is to be...
Who's going to take the action?
The government. The person who boasts every day that I am doing this and
Who is that?
You know that who's that person.
No, you must answer your own question. You've answered all your questions. You don't need me.
Yeah,
all that has happened is color of money has changed from black to pink.
Hello Rajdeep, this is Srinivasan. So, this was amazing trends what you have given. I have a small doubt. In one of the trends you told that, they were democratic dividend and disaster coming together. With all this hatred, violence coming up in the past few years after the election, few months, where is a democratic dividend coming into picture? Is most of disaster only coming into the picture, right? I just want to clarify.
No, the demographic dividend exists in young people like you. Just let's be honest, we have so many talented people coming through our systems who just need opportunity. And the challenge of our times is to provide that equal opportunity. So I believe the demographic dividend lies in equal opportunity.
Yeah, your question.
Yes.
I'm a pro-right, pro-BJP person, but yeah, no one is anti-national here, and I'm a fan of you. Okay.
Very good. May your tribe increase.
Yeah.
But never become a fan of a journalist. My friend Ravish Kumar puts it well. You should be fans of film stars and cricketers, not of journalists.
Okay, now question for you. This question is regarding CAA. Now, I have read various people expressing their disopinion. Okay.
Hold it closer.
Okay. Now
you must be like the leader you like. He knows how to use a mic.
Okay, now I have read various people casting their apprehensions about CAA. I have not read any consistent view from them. All of them have different versions. My question is, when the government has clearly categorized, it is not against any minority, it is not against any Indian Muslims, and my wife is a Muslim.
Yeah.
Okay, now I have a question here for you. What do you think is the main point why people are against it?
There are 2 or 3 reasons. Look, I myself do believe, and if you look at the debates on CA 2003-4, when Mr. Vajpayee was Prime Minister, that's when it came. And Manmohan Singh was also in support of providing citizenship to persecuted minorities in neighboring countries. All you needed to do was to ensure that when you drafted that law, you didn't exclude a particular community. You could have said, we have decided to provide fast-track citizenship to persecuted minorities. By naming every community except one, you sent out for what is actually an inclusive law. You are not excluding anyone in the law technically, right? It's not, you and I don't lose our citizenship under the city, but you are creating the impression, the perception, that one community is being singled. It's again dog whistle politics. That in some way the Ahmadiyas don't deserve to be kept in the same space as a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Sikh today. And therefore, that is troubling. So it's the drafting of the law, in my view. But I can see where the fears are coming from. The fears came because along with that, you said all India NRC hoga. And once you brought them together, then it becomes a combination that is dangerous. Because then you are creating the impression that even if you don't, even if you are disenfranchised or your NRC you don't qualify, you can always come under the Citizenship Amendment Act if you are belonging to certain communities. And I think the part of the problem is Mr. Shah does not inspire trust as Mr. Modi does. Mr. Shah inspires fear. वो कभी-कभी लोगों को देखते ही डर होता है. Amit Shah की वही problem है. When Amit Shah says, unlike Mr. Modi, when Mr. Modi, to be fair to him, when he says, people tend to trust him. Amit Shah says, people, नहीं कुछ तो खोट होगा इसमें. Because you see, you come to parliament saying, अब तो उसके बाद all India NRC लाएंगे. So then people feel ये CA जो है इसके पीछे भी कुछ हो सकता है. I agree with you. Purely as a law, purely as a policy, it was an initiative built from 2003-04. You just need better drafting. And there are only 31,000 people who actually will benefit immediately from it. Please give them the fast-track citizenship that they need. Did you need to do? You did this because, let's be honest, it's political. 19 lakh Indians, 19 lakh people were not kept within the NRC register in Assam. It turned out a large number of them were Hindus. You realize, including you realize then, that that could become a potentially politically hot potato in the Assam elections and also in Bengal. Mamta was playing her NRC politics. To win an election in Bengal, you have essentially brought in CA, you have fast-tracked CA, and then said we'll bring an all-India NRC. So I think that political intent is the problem. The law per se, I do believe there should be fast-track citizenship for persecuted groups in the subcontinent. Why not? Who will disagree with that? The Act does not mention the word persecuted minorities, but essentially, that's why I said the drafting is the problem. The Act per se is not the problem. It's the drafting and the way you have specifically excluded someone from the purview of the Act. No, it's a dog whistle. It could be designed. So when I said it is, in my view, it's the dog whistle. You have deliberately told your vote bank. You are playing vote bank politics. That's the truth. And I'm not saying others have not, but you said you were a party with a difference.
I'm going to step in now, sorry.
No, the moment you make citizenship religion-based, you are essentially going against the very fundamentals of our constitution. So it's the drafting. But you can give citizenship to persecuted groups, but you need to do that in a manner that it is seen as equal and protecting the life and liberty. Article 14, 15 and 21 must be respected.
Thank you, Rajdeep. I'm going to step in with my question now,
Yes.
finally. So, first of all, thank you so much for that broad synthesis and sweep of recent historical trends in the politics, not just of our country, but across the world, the trends that we have seen. My questions are twofold, one perhaps looking back and one looking forward. What do you think in a society such as ours, which has been aspirational and therefore perhaps anxious ever since the liberalization and the growth of the middle class, what do you think led to the grounds becoming so fertile for the BJP to bloom forth, or for the BJP bloom to burst forth like this? And can we learn something from that going forward in terms of, you know, what is going to happen to the opposition and the media? Are we looking at strong person versus strong person plus stooges, or are we looking at a different country?
You know, more than the second question, I'll answer the first. Narendra Modi's politics starts in the early 90s, when he really becomes a leader in a way. That period, I was a young journalist and I tracked Modi on the Rath Yatra. I went for the Rath Yatra because no one else wanted to go from my organization. They thought it was a small event. Mr. Modi's politics start in 1990. And to my mind, this politics of religious identity politics, of religious identity starts in that period. This demolition of Babri Masjid, what flows from that, makes the BJP from a marginal party to a national contender. It has taken 29 years since then, from them to becoming a contender of power to now a dominant party. So I think the trend is very clear. There has been over this period a certain religiosity that has been infused into our politics. Three trends emerged in the early 90s: Mandal, Mandir, and Market. Mandal brought in the whole notion of OBC reservation. Mandir brought in the whole notion of religious identity. And the market brought in the whole sense of this aspirational society that would now have access to greater resources. The BJP has been the cleverest in accommodating all these three trends. The BJP, Mr. Modi is an OBC. It's a very powerful card that he plays, especially in North India. And the BJP, out of all the political parties, was the first to recognize the power of OBC consolidation. The BJP has more OBC MPs. Let's be honest, a Brahmin Baniya party today has, which was called a Brahmin Baniya party, has more OBC MPs than the Congress party. The Congress was reluctant to accommodate the OBCs within what was a upper caste dominated Congress leadership for a long time. Between scheduled caste, scheduled tribes and OBCs, BJP, or more than a third of its MPs today come from these three communities. So that's one. Mandir was part of that DNA. This is a 95-year-old project, ma'am, to build a Hindu Rashtra. It didn't start even in 1990, it started, but 1990 gave it, and the Congress's failure to uphold true secularism, opening the gates of the Babri Masjid, the Shilanyas, 84, Shah Banu. The Congress's period of the 80s is riddled with compromises of running with the secular hare and hunting with the communal hound. And that was, in a sense, exploited by the BJP to create this divide. Ye jo party hai, ye pseudo-secular hai. And the third trend was the market. And again, I think Mr. Modi and the BJP in general have been much faster to capture the zeitgeist, this way of what this liberalized society meant. Mr. Modi often uses the word neo-middle class, for the auto rickshaw driver, someone, as I said, who's aspiring for a better life. And they consciously targeted their group. The Congress is the irony. They brought in liberalization and didn't stand by it. Manmohan Singh should have been hailed as the founder of the liberalized India. Instead, you looked for ways after Anna Hazare how to bring Manmohan Singh down and distance yourself from that man. History may judge him much more kindly than we will. But I think the BJP was much more effective in realizing the changes that were taking place in India. The sense of insecurity that the majority was feeling vis-a-vis the minority. The sense of OBC assertiveness. And the need to embrace market forces more readily. The BJP did it.
Hi Rajdeep, good morning. I'm a company secretary by profession, and my question is to you as a Muslim citizen. I'm very specific on this. Why? Because we have right now, as a Muslim, have faith only on two pillars. One is media and one is Supreme Court. And I'll give you the example. Recently, someone just now quoted that Amit Malviya told something, you as an ICC agent. And you told that, Amit Malviya comes from a BJP party where Advani was there. You are justifying...
Vajpayee.
I'm sorry?
Where Vajpayee was.
Vajpayee was there. And you are justifying Vajpayee as a liberal person. Let me tell you, Vajpayee was the same person who said, is dharti ko samtal hona padega. So he was the architect of, getting the destruction of Babri Masjid, number one. So please don't take, this justification. We are not going to tolerate this, number one. Number two, Supreme Court. Supreme Court has all the time in the world, to pass a judgment, and we respect it as a citizen of India. Number two, supplementary to that, Supreme Court don't have time to, punish the culprits who have demolished the Babri Masjid. So, I'm not talking about, equal rights to given to the Muslims or a Hindu. Why? These are the two pillars which were left over and has been compromised.
I couldn't agree with you more on the second point. I think the sense of injustice, that exists also of the Sikhs. In 1984, 3,000 Sikhs died. How many people prosecuted? 20, 25? What kind of, the same thing with Mumbai 1992-93. No, the point is, look, the people who demolished the Babri Masjid are in power today. Please understand that they have got power. So the Supreme Court and the matter still pending. So there has been a sense of injustice. And I accept that. I don't deny that. I'll tell you what the case, it's like this. Advani makes Vajpayee look good. 1 minute. Modi makes Vajpayee look even better. Now you have Amit Shah. He makes Modi look half good. Tomorrow you might have Yogi Adityanath who will make Amit Shah look like a cuddly bear. Never know. No, 1 minute. Let's be honest. There is a Vajpayee model of running India. Now, we can disagree with the fundamental ideology of the RSS or Hindutva politics. But I think, and I had a lot of interaction with Mr. Vajpayee represented, to my mind, someone who at least believed in consensual politics. There was an element of that. Now, you see, we cannot demonize every individual in this manner. You've got to, this is where I say Samvad is important. You've got to find ways in building dialogue. You cannot treat a Vajpayee-like figure also, in my view, as the enemy. Because then we'll have no friends left eventually. No, he was, in your view, he was the architect. In my view, he was a consensual politician by nature, by instinct. He recognized the flaws in his own party. Remember, he may have been weak, you could argue. He showed weakness at times. But let's not confuse that and say that, so-and-so. I think we have to break out of our echo chambers and our ideological boxes that we are in. And I think Mr. Vajpayee made that effort. That Vajpayee could embrace a George Fernandes on one side and he could find space for a Mamta on the other. He tried. Modi has been deserted by the Shiv Sena. I mean, it has taken Narendra Modi, as I said, for Uddhav Thackeray to be convinced that religion and politics is terrible.
Centrist. I have a question. You mostly spoke about Modi and the party and the impact on domestic politics. And then the point that this is a party which should be viewed, I mean, it's a modern party in the modern vein using modern technology. But most of what you covered was domestic politics. But then globally, you see, I have friends in US, Canada, like many of us, and he has somehow hit a resonant frequency of the NRIs abroad, using an appeal which is different from what he uses. He knows what to say where. And can you comment on his effectiveness in garnering huge crowds and support among people who normally would not get involved with an Indian?
You mean people abroad?
Yes, NRIs abroad.
NRIs practice what I call long-distance nationalism. It's very nice to live in Houston and say, "Ye India mein dekho kya ho raha hai. Hyderabad is in ruins. We need to build India again." So he has sold this idea that I'm going to make India a powerful nation. Now we are a powerful nation where even the Bangladesh minister doesn't want to visit us at the moment. Let's be very clear. In the last 6 months, if you look at the editorials across the world, New York Times, Washington Post, Economist, they're not very charitable. Mr. Modi believes he is a man of destiny. He wants to go down as India's greatest ever Prime Minister. Someone asked me, when do you think Modi will retire? I said at least 1 year after Jawaharlal Nehru did. Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister for 17 years. Modi wants to be Prime Minister minimum 18. So that takes you to 2032. But I'm just saying, he has a sense of history, a man of destiny. But to the NRI, sir, in particular, I think there is this long-distance nationalism that makes Mr. Modi, particularly the Gujarati NRI, a sense of connect that Mr. Modi is supposed to provide with this idea of India once again becoming a strong nation. As I said, independence coming in May 2014 and not in August 1947. So I think the NRI is a particularly problematic creature. And I start my book with my chapter on Madison Madness, where I treated Modi as an ordinary politician, not realizing that the NRI treats him as an avatar of Vishnu. And then the result was that I got myself into trouble. Difficult to say who will be the contenders. But let me be honest. We did an opinion poll. Some channels have done an opinion poll on Delhi. And it appears that Arvind Kejriwal is the front runner by a distance. Now look at what has happened. Arvind Kejriwal came third in Delhi in the Lok Sabha. He didn't win a single assembly segment of the Lok Sabha in Delhi out of the 70. But now they are predicting he'll win 50 plus. In 6 months, the same Indian voter in Delhi who voted for Mr. Modi with 55% of the vote share is now talking of giving the vote to Arvind Kejriwal. What does that show? Maybe he wants leadership. Maybe he looks for local leaders. In Telangana, I think your Minister of State for Home lost in the Vidhan Sabha, but won the Lok Sabha. In Haryana, the BJP won 58% of the vote Lok Sabha, came down to 35% in the Vidhan Sabha. Jharkhand, 51% of the vote Lok Sabha, came down to 34%. BJP controlled 71% of India's land mass in 2017 March. It's come down to 38%. It's come down because quite simply the BJP is making the same mistakes the Congress made in the past. Remote control, chief ministers appointed from Delhi. It doesn't happen. You've got to build local
It
energy.
shows that the average Indian voter is more than average.
Absolutely.
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है सर कि लिखने वाले राजदीप और बोलने वाले राजदीप अलग क्यों है?
इसमें आपको फर्क नजर आता है? हाँ।
मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि लिखने वाले राजदीप और अलग क्यों है?
अलग क्या है? लिखने में आपको समय मिलता है। लिखते हैं आप पहले सोचते हैं उसके बाद लिखते हैं। अब ये बड़ा फर्क है। पर मुझे अच्छा लगा कि आपने मेरी पुरानी 2014 की किताब की
While talks are making rounds about one nation, one election as a means to curb election fund, and while in the current Indian political fabric, where the majoritarian society believes as election as an only means or a weapon to tame the politicians or politics, which is anyway stupid, but by imposing that, I will not taking their only belief in the system, like if the state doesn't perform well, they can still slap in the local body.
Indians, we focus enough on what happens between. You've elected KCR. Can you hold KCR accountable? That's the question. Possibly not. That's where we feel helpless. That's where our democracy is in recession. I believe we should have a right to recall. India should have a right to recall every 2 years. If our MP or MLA has not fulfilled promises, there must be some attempt made. You got to put greater accountability. We have to put fear of the citizen. वो आज हमसे डरते नहीं है. They don't fear us. I don't want them, ideally they shouldn't fear us, but at least they should respect us. I have given them a vote. Did I give the BJP a vote on Citizenship Amendment Act, NRC? They keep saying ये हमारे manifesto में था. But frankly, people voted for Balakot, people voted for 5 trillion economy, people voted, actually voted on that you are going to provide अच्छे दिन. But I don't have a way of asking those questions once you've been voted in for the next 5 years. So I think we need a right to recall in this country. If our MLA or MP has not performed, I must be able to recall him at least every 2 years.
What is your view on this? And in case you feel it is an option, do you think, notwithstanding what you said about the media, can the media be proactive in creating public opinion in working towards state funding of elections?
Media is doing TRP. There is no TRP in state funding. And every law commission report has spoken of state funding. It has to come from the courts. It has to come as a diktat of firman. But as we have seen with electoral bonds as well, they may be all well-intentioned, but they get misused. So even with state funding, it seems to be the way ahead, but I am not certain that it will prevent those in power from misusing their enormous access to money. That is the harsh reality, sir, of Indian politics. So let's be a little practical, unfortunately. But I agree the media should have a debate. The media should debate public health, education, not only when JNU demands a fee hike. We should look at the state of higher education across our...
We can work towards the quinquennial budget, providing for every candidate of a recognized party should spend so much, and if we can have an audit monitoring...
What Hyderabad thinks today, India must think tomorrow. My worry is that Hyderabad has thought just the opposite way. How to increase the amounts of money required for fighting an election.
Last question. I've got orders from Delhi. This is the last question.
I get a feeling that this government and the judiciary is joined at the hips. Now, how would you...
Are you a lawyer?
Not at all. Thankfully, no.
Are you worried about contempt of court?
No, I care the least about it.
You think they're joined at the hip?
Certainly.
A sexual harassment charge is made against the Chief Justice of India. And he decides the charge himself. He decides the sexual harassment charge made against himself. He decides who will hear it, how will it be heard, what is the status. This is the Chief Justice. The next Chief Justice, as I just said, Citizenship Amendment Act, constitutionality, says, first the violence must stop. Why is there violence? Before that, we had a Chief Justice who the opposition attempted to impeach because there were serious charges that were being made against him. You see, I've always believed the idealism, and it's true of journalism, lies in reporters. It's the editors who get compromised. Similarly, it's the judges, the people at the top who compromise, not the people at the bottom. It's the editors who have their nexuses, want Rajya Sabha, this, that, want everything. So I think the judiciary also faces a serious crisis of credibility because of the problems at the top. But that doesn't mean there aren't very good judges out there. We have some very, very fine judges as well. You know, I just would like to leave you with the belief that the glass is half full. I'm trying to convince you it's not so bad. Having told you throughout that it's bad, I know. But I really like to believe that the faith in the average Indian, asking these questions, unmasking these people, and telling truth to power will eventually even force our judiciary to course correction. The judiciary needs course correction, just as the media does, desperately does. But fir subah hogi, tomorrow will be a better day.
Friends, I think on this note, we will wind up. Rajdeep, you have been very patient with our questions.
No problem.
And I hope...
And when you ask him a question, don't allow him to get away by saying no comments. Not take political questions. Imagine any political leader coming to Manthan and saying, I will not take political questions. So please get Sonia Gandhi, the Prime Minister, and make sure that they answer questions of the people of Hyderabad. Or let's at least start with KCR. And then we'll go to the other.